Hello again, and welcome to In Taiwan We Speak. I am Alexander Shin, and this is the last part of our conversation with Wasiq Silan, a Tayal community activist and social science researcher. Now, Wasiq, Finland seems to have a very special place in your life.
Yes.
It is also a country whose indigenous people have historically been subjected to colonial policies, similarly to Taiwan. How would you compare Finland and Taiwan in terms of indigenous people's colonial experiences?
Yeah, wow, this is a very in-depth questions as the first question of this episode.
Let's have a go at it.
Okay. Yeah, so there are absolutely, it's not the same experiences, but to make it very brief, I think like when we are talking about colonial processes and how to nowadays that the reconciliation process that the state is trying to do to establish with the indigenous peoples, that part is quite similar. But then when you look at the societal level, it's interesting to see that in Finland or maybe in Sweden as well, and maybe to some extent in Russia, the challenge they're facing is that the majority of the society cannot see the differences between them and the indigenous people. And the indigenous peoples are invisible, like they don't exist, and then people don't actually know about them. But in Taiwan, I think, of course, that part of the population exists, but the most of the people that I know, the majority Taiwanese, they know the differences between themselves and the indigenous. Maybe it is something that is very stereotypical, but then there is this kind of differences register somewhere in their brain. So when the Taiwanese activists, they're trying to establish some kind of like policy, it's kind of you need a different kind of approach with the government. So I think that is a very big differences between Finland and Taiwan. So one is like you cannot see the differences. The other is that we see the differences, then so what?
I'm coming up with a follow-up question.
All
So
right.
you mentioned, well, this territory, between Russia and Norway.
Yeah.
We're talking about the Sami people.
Yes.
Right? So the indigenous people of the north. To what extent, from your experience, are Sami culture, identity, well, generally Sami people, represented in those societies?
Well, it's not much represented to summarize, but of course there is like regional differences because of the historical processes and how does the majority minority dynamics. So you can see that in Norway it is much more visible. Maybe for the reason of the stronger Norwegianization process, they try to assimilate the indigenous peoples. It could be one reason that there's like bounce back. And maybe there's another reason of like simply there are just more Sami people in Norway. But then when you see like Sweden and Finland, and then also to another extreme, like in Russia, the Kola Sami communities, they're not so much visible, or their rights are not as much protected or spoken about compared to the Norwegian side of Sapmi, which is the Sami territory.
Now, since you're also yourself an indigenous person, so when you talk to people in Finland or in Europe about Taiwan, how hard is it for people to understand Taiwan as a country that has its own indigenous histories?
Yeah, this is usually come at something that's very new to people. Yeah, that people don't usually know that there are indigenous peoples in Taiwan. But I think to a larger extent that people know about Chiang Kai-shek, people knew about Kuomintang, and they knew something about Taiwan, but then they don't know so much about indigenous peoples in Taiwan. So for me, it's not something that I can use to leverage more space to talk to people because people don't really know. But I could imagine that if you are talking to people in Canada or in the US, they kind of have a general idea of where Taiwan is and then what kind of challenges and indigenous situations, then it's easier to connect. But then according to my own experience, it's not taken.
So when you talk to people and let's say you're introducing your own background, what is people's reaction?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, to start with, Finnish people are not a very chatty group of folks, and then usually you don't talk so much, let alone talking about something that's very personal. So that is the first threshold that you have to go across. And then secondly, I have also my own threshold that has been troubling me for a long time, which is that I don't think I'm indigenous enough to talk about my own indigenous roots. Because I feel that, yeah, my grandmother, she spoke the language when she was born, but then I don't speak the language. I don't look indigenous. People look at me and say that you don't look like indigenous in any way that we think that indigenous people should look like. Of course, it's a problem that we need to overcome. But then for me, it has been like a very much causing a sense of doubt and anxiety, and then thinking that why would I advertise myself when I don't think that I am. So it was actually a very big step for me to decided that I would use Wasiq and decided that I would put the Wasiq Silan on the national ID card, because I think it was also a strength interacting with world indigenous people. So indigenous people living in different kind of societal circumstances. And I see this intergenerational trauma and the idea of like, oh, the younger people, there's actually this unspoken silences that is kind of reverberated in the families. And how do you reclaim? So it's actually a process that you can see in different kind of communities across different contexts. So that gave me strength. Then I decided I would do it. So yeah, so to summarize, well, I did not have a chance so much to talk about my own family or background or indigeneity. But nowadays, there are more and more. I will talk more. I will try to talk more, and I'll come back to your question in our next interview.
But also, if we have any listeners from Finland, please do pay attention to this. All right.
Decolonizing care in Finland is not a topic yet, academically speaking. Yeah, it's actually very interesting because that's maybe many listeners will know that the Nordic countries, they're very famous for their welfare system, and the institutionalized care is the majority, how the majority people get supported. So I think if you look at their nursing education or social work education, there is this very powerful, you can call it hegemonic structure. People just trust the state. Why would you decolonize anything when the state has decided the best for you? And what you need to do is to follow the state, and then you can try to implement like different kind of things and then put people in different kind of categories, because depending on how they are maybe like a risk group or they are like problematic families. So all you need to do is to implement instead of thinking about whether this arrangement is good or not. In Britain or in the US, and now to some extent in Taiwan, there is this idea that the arrangement is not fair. And as social workers, as nurses, as practitioners, we need to advocate for our people's right. But then in Finland, it's still not so much. So that is current situation that I understand in Finland. We're facing different kind of sets of challenges, and we need different sets of tools. And it's definitely very helpful to establish more collaboration, so we know like how do we kind of putting these questions apart and come up with the best solutions.
What kind of lessons do you think Taiwan should take?
My short answer to that is that we have tried for a long time to look for the best practices from different parts of the indigenous societies, from Yukon to New Zealand, Aotearoa. But I think what we need to rethink is that there is no best practices that we can just copy paste. Because what we usually see from the governmental officials is that, oh, we need to find this great solution to all our problems. And then this is the panacea for all the problems that we face. But then it does not usually turn out like that. So I think what they need to do is to really look inwards and make the empires visible, to make their own practices visible, and to really to have more humility, to listen, not just to decide for people. Because if they are just trying to copy paste from other best practices, it's going to be packaged as another way of colonizing policy or in different forms and ways. So that's what I think. Probably a little bit provocative, but...
But also thought-provoking.
Thank you.
I've actually had one last question in a short, brief answer. How far do you think Taiwan has come in the job of decolonization?
I have like two thoughts. The first thought is that Taiwan has made very remarkable steps, towards recognizing that history that they used to teach people is not singular, but it's actually multiple different kind of histories. And Taiwan has been trying to do this national language law that you have touched upon in the previous episodes with different interviewees, like about recognizing different language diversities and then their right to exist as a national language. So I think that part is very good, but then we're only still in the very beginning stage, so we don't know how it is going to be. So that is the first thought that I have. The second thought that I have is actually rethinking this idea of decolonization, because decolonizing means getting rid of colonization. But, like for academics, you always think about like, can we actually get rid of colonization? They're here to stay. And then if I'm doing a social policy, it is very kind of not inherently not colonial, right? So I think I've been also trying to understand what does it mean to decolonize, and is it really possible to decolonize, and how do we live out indigeneity in the contemporary Taiwan in a way that both language and culture could exist together, like what we talk about in terms of the conviviality of like openness and friendliness of how people can exist in their own way equally, but not decolonize, not trying to get rid of them, because they're probably going to be here to stay. Christianity is coming, it's here to stay, and Taiwan is here. So it's more practical to think about how do we live together rather than getting rid of each other.
That's a very beautiful answer to such a complex question.
Oh, yo, thank you.
Thank you so much. And well, since we're approaching the end of our episode, let's talk a little bit about your future plans, if that's okay. Because you have just relocated back to Taiwan, and you're going to undertake a new position at the Donghua University in Hualien.
Yes.
Right? So could you tell us a little bit, what are you planning to do there?
Yes. So I'm very excited to undertaking this assistant professorship at Donghua University in the College of Indigenous Studies, which is the only university that has a College of Indigenous Studies. So what I plan to do is to deepen my research on care, and then I hope to get to know more about Tayan societies, communities, knowledge, not only in the bodily care or mental care, historical trauma, but also in the kind of like an environmental care of how different kind of plants, animals, and different things that kind of interact with people, kind of a relational care in the wider environment. So I hope to get a better understanding in that. And I'm also very excited to get to know the vibrant research environment in the Donghua University. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to come back.
I hope that you enjoy that kind of experience, but also please keep us updated about that workshop that's going to happen.
Yes, for sure. The walking, yes.
The walking workshop about, what you need to know, but don't go to those big landowners with their hot springs.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much. And then if listeners and Ole, if you're coming to Hualien, please come over to visit us in Donghua. We're just half an hour away from the Hualien city, so it's actually quite close by, and it's a beautiful place. It feels almost like you're in a different kind of mind space and then landscape. It kind of also like it will change you as a person if you come. So we also have an international PhD program if you want to consider one of your PhDs. We are very happy to have more students. So
Right. And finally, how do you say in Taiwan we speak Tayal in Tayal?
Oh my goodness. Well, I actually asked my dad about this because, as I explained, my Tayan is not as good as I wish. So I have it prepared. So we speak Tayan. In Tayan is Nyuktak Kemayan Kena Tayan Maki Taiwan Skani. In Tayan language, we also the same as Saigi, and also with Taiwan, us, we speak, it also have like the inclusive us and the exclusive us.
Right.
So yeah, in here, it's like inclusive.
All
So
right, because we
everywhere.
all speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it goes like this. Nyukta kemayan kena Tayan maki Taiwan skani.
Thank you, Washak, for being with us throughout these 3 super interesting episodes.
Thank you. Kiitos. Kagaidala. Goodbye.
And dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed our series on Tayal. If you did, please don't forget to recommend this program to your friends. And of course, do come back next week for another one of Taiwan's fascinating languages. Once again, this was In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. I am Oleg, and see you next week.